Hello, folks. Good morning. It's Luke at Impact Mobility. We're just allowing people to join the webinar, so we're going to give it a minute or two while people are just coming online, and then we'll kick off very shortly. So, see you in a moment. Good morning, everybody. This is Luke James. I'm Head of Strategy for Impact Mobility. I think we've got most of our audience this morning in the United States. So good morning, everybody. I hope you're all well. It's a fairly grey and miserable evening in London, so I'm quite jealous. Really excited to have you all here. This is the first webinar of a series we're going to do, which is ahead of our Impact Mobility conference in San Diego in November this year. The real challenges for us when we start looking at mobility and the new mobility space is relationships between public and private. It's aligning what government and cities are doing from a congestion, from emissions, from a socioeconomic development point with some of the private sector companies who are looking to work and align their goals and their ambitions with the cities and work in unison. So it's about new business models, it's about the partnerships we create, and ultimately how we're making money. So we've got a really good group here this morning. Smart Columbus are really pushing the envelope in this space, and we're really happy to have Jordan Davis opening up with their vision, what they're doing. And thereafter, we've got Sean and Troy from Karma Automotive, who, in my opinion, are doing some really interesting stuff in the OEM space, combining EVs with luxury, and we'll come on to that later. But first of all, I'm going to introduce Jordan and let her tell you a little bit more around Smart Columbus. Jordan, over to you. Jordan, if you're there, you seem to have self-muted. There we go. Are you there, Jordan?
Right. I am.
Hey,
Thanks,
Jordan.
Luke.
No problem.
Great. Well, I'm excited to be here and to kick off this conversation about how we're spending money and how we can potentially monetize and make partnerships that work in order to bring the societal outcomes that we want to see in our communities through technology. Smart Columbus started in 2016 when we won the Smart Cities Challenge. But we have a fundamental belief that transportation is on the brink of radical transformation. This is a great photo that is one of my favorites. The photo on the left is from 1908. The photo on the right is from 10 years later. The one on the left you'll see is predominantly horse and buggies with only one automobile on the left side of the roadway. And the one on the right is all automobiles with one buggy that you can see there on the left. And this was in an era where there wasn't mass distributions, there are supply chains out today. There aren't the marketing machines that build the consumer demand for such things. But the technology worked, and it gave people freedom and the ability to move in a way that they hadn't before. And it was adopted like wildfire. And we believe in Columbus, we are just like everybody else around the world, in a place where we are going to start to experience this rate of adoption and change over the next 10 years. But we have a lot of decisions about how this starts to look. And this was what the federal government wanted to understand. And this is why they wanted to invest at a city level to work with the community to see how they're going to deploy technology and transportation to really make a difference in solving the societal outcomes that we have in our communities today. And so in 2016, the U.S. Department of Transportation put out a federal grant for $40 million that was matched with $10 million from a philanthropy, Paul G. Allen. And 78 cities applied, and Columbus came out as the sole winner of that challenge. And by winning that $50 million, at first we thought we won a trophy that said we are the U.S. Smart City. But in fact, like what I started with we really won a job to demonstrate how a city can become smart. Where do we put our money? What type of bets are the right bets? And where can we really make the greatest outcome? And if you do it in a community like Columbus, we're in the middle of the United States, the capital of Ohio, where we really are a test market for what can work at a global level and in mid-sized cities around the world. We think that we can really demonstrate what's ready for the market right here in our community. But to the point of this webinar, we are very committed to doing this in collaboration. So while we have a big vision to really lead the way, we are going to do this in great collaboration across the public and private sector. And we're going to think about it strategically, not in a point of view where all of our investments start and stop with the grant, but really the grants are catalysts for long-term thinking and planning an investment that our whole community needs to make. So we're not just going to let the city do it alone, and we're not going to let the private sector kind of mandate where they think technology is going. It has to be a collective conversation about where we need to go. And so we expect work plan in 3 different parts. The first are our foundational. These are what I would call our no regret bets. So if we put our money towards these things, these are the things that we know we're going to need to do long into the future, and they need owners, and they need continued investment and ongoing improvement. They're not start and stop projects. The second is really a living laboratory. These are pilots, which many communities around the world are doing pilots in all types of different technology. And we're right there alongside of them, trying to understand and ground truth where the technologies are today to understand how they can scale and how they can be used in a way that actually solves problems. And then the third, which I would argue is almost harder than any of the technology that we're doing, is the behavior change that needs to happen. Technology for technology's sake is never the right way to do it. But if you leave technology to its own devices, it can create consequences that aren't good for the community. So you really have to think, how do we direct the deployment of technology in a way that's going to have a systems-wide positive impact. So in summary, just as our partnerships here, we have aligned investment goals alongside the grant. So we have $90 million at the point of application that we matched with our grant dollars. We've taken that to about $522 million. And that increase has happened through really direct engagement with our community of over 1,500 stakeholders and the formation of over 50 local partners that have investments that they're making towards our goals and alongside our grant projects. And it culminates into how we work every day. So we are an organization that is a joint venture between the private sector and the local government in Columbus. And we are co-located here with multiple consultants and different experts, but also our public utility, American Electric Power, and our university, the Ohio State University. And so it's really a representation of our commitment to working together every step of the way.
Smart.
So I'm going to talk to you about kind of our two foundational investments that we're making. The first is in connected vehicle environment. So we have a belief that while we understand there's direct short range communications and 5G, the space of intelligent transportation systems is going to require our infrastructure and streets to be able to facilitate a much more connected environment than exists today. A data exchange between infrastructure and vehicles and vehicle-to-vehicle communication. And so we are building out that infrastructure so that R&D can occur on these roadways. We are doing interstate environment to the northwest of our community, an urban environment in the center, and then a logistics environment to the east. Our next largest investment, so this is the largest investment we're making with our grant dollars exclusively. And this is in building out the operating system that we believe we're going to continue to need in our communities to manage the complexity of things. This operating system has the capability to ingest near real-time data. It is built on all open source tools, so it's actually going to be open for people to use and to take come at the end of this month. And it's built with really modern architecture to help people save in storage costs, but also to allow it to be cloud agnostic, so that it's very transportable and expandable to other cities and other projects that our community and partners might want to use it for. And then in terms of pilots, how we're really investing here, we are looking at autonomous vehicles, as many communities are, but we're looking at how can autonomous vehicles solve for first mile, last mile, or only mile challenges. And so we've deployed our first self-driving vehicle right outside of our experience center in the heart of our downtown, connecting residents and visitors to area destinations. It's an only mile solution, meaning that there was no existing transit in this area that we've been connecting. And it's in the first pilot's intended to be a high education and trust builder in the community so that we can continue to invest in pilots of this nature. We're going to be doing our second pilot this fall in a lower income neighborhood, providing first mile, last mile service from a transit center to an area community center and food bank. We're also going to be using technology to target where we believe we need to provide enhanced human services that give our residents who need it most more convenient, dignified, and dynamic ways to get to where they need to go. And so this first pilot is Rides for Baby. It is a infant, it serves expectant mothers who are on Medicaid. It provides them on-demand rides to their healthcare appointments. And the novelty here is that we're working with local transit providers. We're providing the user interface through existing trusted partners in the neighborhood. These are brands and names that are known due to other social services that exist in our community. And we're really tailoring the service to meet the needs of these mothers with vehicles that have car seats in them, to being able to provide access and allowing them to use their rides to go to other services like fresh food as well, but really trying to put the resident in the center and make the systems work for them. This pilot has gone live. It will be highly confidential over the next 2 years, so it's about all I can share, but we're excited and believe that the outcomes we'll see will really help solve one of the crises we have in our community, high rate of infant mortality. Another project pilot project we are undertaking that has gone live is called Wayfinder. It is an application that will provide individuals who have cognitive disabilities, maybe they're on the autism spectrum, or they are a senior citizen who is suffering from some degree of dementia. This allows their caretaker to customize instructions and directions for them to better navigate public transit more independently. And then my last kind of area of the portfolio that we're investing in is really in the culture shift. So how do we think about bringing electric transportation to life? How do we get more people to be taking public transit and optimizing the new shared mobility operators that we have today to reduce congestion? And how do we really extend access for all residents and be sure that as we introduce these services, we're doing it in an equitable way? So in terms of mobility options, Columbus is no different than what you're seeing in cities around the country. Everything above the line are representative of introductions of mobility services via the private sector. Everything below the line is public sector introductions. The private sector is a very, very close partner. They have grown our ecosystem, giving our residents more options than ever to get around. And in a mid-sized city with regional sprawl, we think that really matters, and it's going to be the key to getting more people out of single occupant vehicle commuter behavior and into a more shared mobility lifestyle. And we think that this ecosystem needs to be working together, and that the real opportunity is to think at a systems level collaboratively about how we put public transit in the center to maintain high capacity movement of people, and to ensure that everybody has access at an affordable manner across the region. But how do we then link these public or these private systems more seamlessly? And so one of the projects that we have is what we're calling Pivot, and it is a multimodal trip planning application that will get residents, or that is a user interface that will allow residents to be able to book, plan, and eventually pay for multiple modes in one transaction. So they'll be able to use public transit, a scooter, and potentially an Uber or a Lyft, or definitely a yellow cab in our community, to take a seamless trip throughout the region. And this is something that we think is truly the future of mobility in terms of building this ecosystem and this common platform, so that people don't have to consult multiple apps and they can find the best option for them. From an electrification perspective, there's no argument that we need to be moving this way. The industry has declared it as the future drivetrain, and we believe there's a lot we need to do at a community level to ensure that it's adopted equitably, that we're preparing from an infrastructure perspective. So we have great partnerships with our utility, and our utility is investing significantly in infrastructure, as well as modernizing our grid and putting more renewables on the grid. And then our job as central entity is to educate the community and increase our market rate of adoption. And so we've taken, since the start of the program, we were at about 0.47, 0.37% of new car sales were electric. Our program goal was to get to 1.8% by the end of this year. We've achieved it as of last year. And that's a credit to a lot of strategic interventions in training, doing marketing campaigns, test drives, build ships to offer incentives. But to really think differently about how can we build a viable market without public incentive. We have the federal tax credit, but we don't have it else. So this has been a really pragmatic approach to growing the market, and we're starting to see really great results. In summary, I just would say, we have 2 grant projects, both of which are do have deadlines and ending dates. But as I started out with my presentation, we never imagined that our work would start and stop with the grant. We really believed that the way we think strategic and foundational investments to pilots to a system-wide shift is where we need to go as a community. So we are looking further ahead past these deadlines to really think about what's right for our community to grow in a smart way, and what's new and next in technology that can bring value to the problems that we face in our community. So I hope that's a good overview. We do have a playbook in which you can understand case studies and lessons learned that we've been learning along the way. And as part of that, we're fortunate to travel to many communities. And we think our program is very representative of a lot of trends of what cities are doing. And we've learned from around the world to inform what we're doing, and we look forward to doing more learning with other cities to inform what we do next. So thanks, Luke, and I hope that was a good kickoff to the conversation.
Thank you, Jordan. That was awesome. Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions, if you'd be so kind to humour me on these. The first one is, so what you guys are doing is really cool from almost a test bed. I know the grant kicked you off, but what's your process for disseminating and then deciding which technology solutions or which sectors you're going to engage and actually then start using?
Yeah, so we studied a lot just where the future of mobility would be going, and we anchored in a belief, as many have in the industry, that the future is going to be, connected, autonomous, shared, and electric. From there, we kind of took that same framework of what are foundational investments we have to prepare for that. What type of pilots are ready for us to test, or that we could add distinct learnings into the smart city space. And then where is the greatest consequence lie if we don't bring it to the market the right way? And where do we need to be helpful in directing the adoption? And so that's really kind of how we thought about it. And then when you get a layer deeper to your question about how are we selecting the technology and the vendors, I would say this is where it gets hard. I think there's a few things that play that puts governments and communities in a unique position, given how quickly the industry is changing. The city of Columbus, who is our capital city, who's the recipient of the grant dollars, conducts most of the RFPs. And as many people in the private sector know, specifically in the startup space, know that public RFP processes are not very favorable to startups. And oftentimes startups are where some of the most innovative technology is. So we've had to look at different ways to facilitate partnerships in other departments and in other use cases at much smaller scale in order to be exposed and to build the credibility needed to win some of the larger contracts. And then in terms of vetting some of our larger investments, we did have a philosophy of building on open source. So the multimodal trip planning application and the operating system are built in open source. So we were procuring development teams more than an existing technology. And then on the connected vehicle side, I mean, we've engaged experts after experts, and the US DOT is very well versed in emerging tech, specifically around DSRC, and advised substantially on all of that. And we've published all of our concept of operations, so we've been very transparent about what we're looking for, and that transparency process was a big part of how we selected what we needed.
Thank you. I have one more question, but I will just first of all say, folks, if you are curious, put it on the group and I will ask them, or at least relay it to Jordan and then Sean and Troy later on. But Jordan, my next question was, obviously we talk about pragmatism and how you do this. The big sort of, I guess, anchor on lots of these projects getting off the ground, or especially in the monetization point, is data and what people can share, what people are prepared to actually allow. What has been your position or philosophy in terms of what you want partners to share with you and what you're happy to do? How siloed and how collaborative can you be from a data perspective?
Yeah, another really great question, getting at the heart of the complexity of this space. We believe that there is great power in sharing data and breaking down the silos and building up partnerships and giving people a fuller view of how to bring about systems that work together. Now, that is easy to say, hard to do, especially in very competitive spaces where there is no rightful owner and there's no real, I would say, strong use cases yet of what the value is or is not. And so people are very nervous about what value they're giving away with the data. And of course, security is one of those as well. I think our most data exchange relationship is going to be in the multimodal trip planning application. We do have the ability to restrict access to different private providers' data within the systems that we're building. And I think that is it's a big deal for the companies that participate. But also security is huge for us too, and ensuring that we're not compromising any of our environments across, all of the providers and partners. In general, though, I think for what we have found is that the process of ingesting data is challenging. It's not as automatic as anybody needs, and so the skill sets that you have to have on your team to support that type of work, if you really want to get systems-wide view of problems, whether it's around food access or not, the data is all over the place, and it needs a curator and probably more curators to really do it well.
No, very good. You've actually just, I said it was my last question. You've triggered my mind. And this is my actual last question. I apologize. It is, when you were talking about the, sort of the multimodal and the choice of options, a lot of the big mobility service providers are almost in that platform position. Now, a lot of us probably here today, if you go onto your phone, there's certain apps which everyone has. And that's an easy advantage if they want to start using multimodal activities. How does Columbus or other cities almost incentivize audience and users to be on the city applications opposed to the MSP themselves?
Yeah, I mean, we're still working on that. So the app will go live this summer, and we're going to continue to optimize it throughout. I think the biggest, through all of our end user engagement, we learned that the greatest value that we could bring to users was the ability to pay, to have a common payment component. And the payment part will launch at the beginning of next year. And so we think that, one, that's distinctly unique, the value that doesn't exist in the market, and so that can bring users to it. But also the majority of people that are using alternative transit are still using our public transit system, and we have a really great partnership with our public transit authority. They're actually going to be the long-term owners of the app, and they're prioritizing this and betting big on this application as a place where they will do most of their mobile transactions out of. And so having a strong anchor light will ensure that we can continue to make it something that people will use. But in terms of the philosophy of how do you get somebody to use a local app, I think the nature of thinking of it not as an ending point. Oftentimes in government, you'll take a project, it'll be scoped, and it concludes. But continuing to optimize it to make it really usable and keep up with user expectations is going to be essential. And the Transit Authority is doing a lot of due diligence right now with a study to determine how to staff to do that, to think differently about this product than many others as an ongoing operation, like we do just running the buses as well. So I think for many local solutions, we're going to have to start to think like that when we take on these digital, or I would say more application-based services.
Got you. Okay, Jordan, thank you very much. I realise there's actually been an avalanche of questions come through, but I'm not going to keep going now, but I have seen them. I will share them with Jordan after this call and connect them back post-webinar. But for now, folks, just a big round of applause, even though we're all on mute, which is slightly ironic. But thank you, Jordan. That was great. And we're going to move on to the team at Karma and ask a few questions there. So, Jordan, thank you. And next up, do we have Sean and Troy? Can you hear me?
Hi, Luke.
Hi, it's Troy.
Hello, Troy. Hello, Sean. First of all, thank you for joining us. It's really great to have you guys part of the conversation. Karma Automotive. Now, from the conversations I've had, from what I've read, you guys are doing some really interesting and cool stuff. But I guess maybe you guys first, could you just introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about Karma?
Luke, absolutely. And first off, thank you for the invitation for this. We're very excited. My name is Sean Hazare, and I lead the Mobility Initiative and Strategic Partnerships at Karma. A little bit about Karma. We're a luxury boutique OEM focused on electric powertrains, all based here in Southern California. We're about 1,000 strong, and we started selling our first product, the Karma Revero, in 2016, and you can find them across US and Canada.
Hey, this is Troy Beats. I lead the product development for Karma. Currently working on the Revero, which is actually already out into the market, and planning the Revero GT launch in the fourth quarter of this year. You may have seen us, we actually came out with the Revero GT vehicle at the Shanghai Auto Show last year, or this year, later last year. We're continuing to progress with other models within the next 4 years.
Awesome. I've seen the photos, guys. I'm looking forward to seeing one in San Diego in November. They look really cool. I guess my first question with Karma is, you guys are really positioning yourselves in the luxury mobility space. It's almost a niche in of itself. But I'm keen to know, how have you guys progressed to this stage, and how do you define the differences between standard and luxury mobility?
Yeah, Luke, that's a really good question. Being such a small, tight-knit OEM, we have a really unique relationship with our customers, our clients, if you will. And one of our most interesting findings from our research is that one of the biggest luxuries that our customers look for is actually time. And how can you reduce the amount of friction at a dealership store? How can you reduce the amount of friction at the user experience and infotainment system? This element of time translates 100% to a mobility experience. And so we're looking at these current use cases across mobility, from staying at a luxury hotel to looking at instant test drives. How do you reduce the user experience friction, and how do you give back time to the customers? And that's really the biggest opportunity that we see in the mobility luxury space.
Awesome. And I think where I find Karma Automotive really interesting is, yes, the luxury space you've mentioned, but also the whole business models you're creating. And on that note, talk to us a little bit about the value proposition. How is it different from other operators? And then critically, how is it scalable, and where's the risk?
Yeah, it's also a really good question. And, I would say when you look at the landscape of mobility and all the programs that are out right now, it's a little bit, you could say, one-dimensional, that we're looking at cars or transportation from point A to point B. But when you actually get to this level of luxury, and we're selling these vehicles at a premium price, $130,000, it's much more than just transportation. You're basically selling a vehicle that's a ladder up to social mobility. And how do you translate this idea of a status of wealth, a status of symbol of status, into a mobility experience that's just for a short time, whether it be a minute, an hour, a day, etc. And that's a big element of what we're trying to focus on. How do you translate that type of that emotional feature set experience into a short duration mobility experience?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about Sean and how we separate ourselves within the organization is the idea of value proposition is a little bit different for me. The value proposition for us is that we're a fairly new company. We don't have legacy to validate our brand. We don't have a lot of consumers in our vehicles yet, and we're still very young. We're untested. So building the brand, we don't have the opportunity to come out of the gate with strong retention. So the aspect of mobility and the subscription base and partnerships with hotels, some of the unique things that we're trying to do to establish our brand early and to continue to have a luxury feel to our vehicles, partnering with other institutions. A really good example of that would be, we're trying to discover right now if there's opportunities with Virgin Voyages. Virgin has a cruise ship line in Miami. They have 3 ships now, and they have a port on Miami and South Beach. And the mobility allows us to partner with someone like a Virgin Voyages, where someone who flies into Miami and is going to take a cruise to the Caribbean. Typically, most people go to Miami and take cruises, come in a few days earlier to explore Miami. With the mobility division within Karma, we're able to say, if you have a suite on this particular ship, you'll also have access to a Rivero to discover Miami. And we're also then expanding our brand and getting people to be aware of Karma. And at the same time, and this is something that I used to do at Lexus as well, is we're able to expand our brand into the ship and into hotels as well. Meaning, if we partner with a specific hotel in California, we'll have that vehicle at that hotel. For people who are at the hotel, they can drive it, but we're also expanding our brand within the room itself, which means we actually go in, create a suite within the hotel so that the brand and the features of the brand and what you'd expect in Karma also transcend into the room that you're in, so that the brand never leaves you. So you'll experience Karma at the automotive level. When you get into the hotel, you'll experience Karma within the hotel. Our design services are also exposed by mobility, because we're also building chairs and furniture and paintings, and we're able to design that hotel to be parallel with the vehicle. So for me, the idea that we can actually improve our brand much quicker than typical OEMs is the benefit for us.
Cool. It's bold and I find it fascinating. There's so much opportunity. I guess, Troy, Sean, well, this is quite broad, but what sort of challenges are you facing? You know, it's an OEM connecting with hotels and with luxury cruises and whatnot. You know, it's a huge opportunity. What challenges are you seeing?
You know, I think one of the bigger challenges is actually internally. I don't think Sean touched on it, but most OEMs, if you're talking about BMW and Volvo and Mercedes and the Ferraris of the world, Karma didn't start out as a mobility brand. We started out as a luxury electric vehicle brand, and the mobility was a solution to separate ourselves and go into the mobility scene without any legacy. And I think one of the bigger things that we faced here was that within our own organization, you have people who have come from other OEMs who were either at GM or at Chrysler, and the idea of creating a mobility program where you're going to set up a subscription service where people can use your vehicle for minutes at a time or hours or days at a time is not what the norm was for OEMs as little as 3 years ago. So it's basically getting people out of their comfort zones within the organization. And then once you do that, I think one of the other challenges is getting consumers okay with doing this with a vehicle that's over $130,000, giving them the opportunity to subscribe to it and not have to lease it for 36 months is another comfort zone we have to challenge. But I think one of the greatest things that's helped us is data. And we look at the luxury space, and if you look at the average time someone's in a Ferrari or a Bentley or a Rolls Royce, it's actually as little as 14 months on average. So people aren't actually in that space. They don't want to be in their vehicle over 3 years. So we have to adapt, and I think Sean had done a really good job of identifying those pain points and creating a mobility program that actually represents what people with wealth actually want, which is they don't want to be tied into something that's going to depreciate over 3 years. They don't want to be tied into something for 3 years. And I think the bigger impact is being able to give them back their time and have them not pay for something and invest in something for 3 years is one of the bigger impacts I think we have.
Yeah, okay. And Sean, I'm just following Troy's comments there. If you're looking at the market you're in, I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that UX is essential here. Now, on that note, is it, and you know, what's the research you've done around customer experience, the behaviors that Troy's mentioned, and how much do you know and how it's influencing the Karma solution?
Yeah, Luke, absolutely. And you're absolutely right that UX is crucial to this whole program and this whole experience. The reality is when you're buying a $130,000 car, our customers have these extremely high expectations from the fit and finish of the vehicle to the UI UX inside, and that actually translates into these experiences that we're developing. You know, for us to do it right and to meet that high expectations, we need a lot of research, and Troy touched upon it. But the amount of data that we've looked at and analyzed is pretty remarkable. We haven't just been looking at automotive and mobility solutions, but even things beyond this industry. And it's kind of surprising, it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of changes to the way that we look at luxury goods. There's actually, you could rent a Rolex, you could rent a watch subscription models now. There's you could rent an experience or subscribe to a private jet experience, and how does that translate to what we're doing, and how does that affect? And so we're learning from all these different types of research, from automotive, but also beyond automotive to luxury, and that's a big impact to what we're trying to build in these business models and these opportunities.
No, excellent response, Sean. It leads me to maybe a bigger or maybe deeper question. As many of us know, there's a few mobility players in this space, not quite luxury, but in that subscription modeling and ridership space. People like Reach Now, Maven, who have recently pulled out of a few cities. How are Karma responding to this? Do you have a geographic strategy? And talk to us about how you're being sustainable and scalable.
Yeah, it's really great question, Luke. And this is one of the big challenges with mobility in the space is the sustainability. How do you actually make a true business model from it? And I think this is the biggest challenge is finding the right use cases, the right cases that make the most sense. And when we're looking at this program of placing these vehicles, it had to make sense where it could actually improve our brand rather than dilute the brand. It had to make sense on where we place the vehicles. And so that's a big factor. We're not placing these cars anywhere. We're placing them at strategic locations like luxury boutique hotels, like cruise ships that are very luxury. And that's a big element of going towards a sustainable market. And kind of to leverage a lot of his experience from the financial arm of automotive, we've had a big understanding and a big learned lessons of how much of a factor does a mobility program play into the residual of a car? How much does a factor does it play into the opportunities to sell more new cars and even CPOs down the road? And so it's really taking a step back and looking holistically at the whole sales of an experience, from selling a new car to selling a 1 hour experience to even selling your brand. And that plays a big factor into building the right business models and the right use case.
Got you. Sean, I've got one final question, which is from Richard, who's listening in, which is quite simply, what are your volume expectations?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's one of the challenges with this type of luxury, right? Is exclusivity is a big factor in the experience. If everyone has a Karma Revero, then it doesn't have that same type of appeal. And so we're being very, very careful and making sure that we don't over dilute the product and basically have too many Reveros at a hotel. Then it kind of ruins that type of exclusivity. So in many ways, being small and making sure the pilot is flawless and perfect has been a big impact to also keeping it very exclusive and to the right thing. So we have some pretty broad plans to grow, but the volumes that we're looking at are a fraction of typical other mobility experiences on purpose.
Got you. No, thank you. Again, there's a heap of questions coming through, but I appreciate we are now pushing for time. So what I'm going to do, folks, is something we do with all our webinars. I will send these questions to Sean and Troy. I'll also send them to Jordan, who will respond, to the questions they're able to, and I will share that with you in the post-webinar report we send out. But at this time, I just want to say to Sean, Troy, thank you. Sean will be speaking with us at Impact Mobility in San Diego. He may share his secret sauce. He probably won't, but they're doing some really, really cool stuff, and it'd be great to come and meet him. Jordan is, again, the opening part of this event is really from a city, from an MPO perspective. It's really setting the scene on what, and then how we're getting there. So there's lots of folk from the West Coast, Chicago, Boston, New York are also joining us. And then it's really looking at how OEMs like Karma are evolving in this new mobility space. So that's in November. I'd recommend you'll come and join us. We have a sales discount ending tomorrow. You have my email address. Please contact me or reach out directly. But otherwise, folks, I will share this with you tomorrow, the recording, and any questions, reach out. I'm very friendly, as you can probably tell, and ask lots of questions. So that's all for now. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll speak very soon. Thank you all.